315 years after his death, Aurangzeb regularly trends on India's Twitter, gets quoted in speeches of regional and national politicians, features in the columns of all mainstream and alternative media, and is mentioned remarkably often in India's acrimonious TV debates. If continued relevance were to be a yardstick of success for a statesman, he surely outshines everyone. What makes Aurangzeb the 17th century autocratic ruler of the Mughal Empire loom large over the 21st century political discourse of the modern Democratic Republic of India? Welcome to Argumentative Indians. Today, we are joined by an eminent scholar of Indian history, Professor Syed Ali Nadeem Rezavi, former chairman of Center of Advanced Studies, Department of History, Aligarh Muslim University, and author of the book, Fathpur Sikri Revisited. Dear sir, welcome to Argumentative Indians.
Thank you.
The conventional view is that Aurangzeb was a religious fanatic who undid the political goodwill earned by his tolerant predecessors and precipitated the decline of the once great Mughal Empire. His actions have been traditionally interpreted in context of his self-stated objective of promoting Islam and converting Hindus and people of other faiths to Islam. This creates the impression that he was so beholden to his religious beliefs that he was willing to sacrifice political expediency for it. However, this view is being increasingly challenged by modern scholarship. Some of the opponents, including Audrey Truschke, have argued that we might have misunderstood Aurangzeb. Instead of religion driving Aurangzeb's politics, perhaps it was Aurangzeb using religion to pursue his politics. Modern Indians are all too familiar with politicians deploying religion to their advantage. So what makes us believe that a 17th century politician was any more genuine in his tall claims than his modern counterparts? I invite you, Professor Rezavi, to enlighten us on Aurangzeb. Was he the religious tyrant, the bigoted autocrat that he's traditionally depicted, or was he a wily statesman deploying religion for his political agenda?
Thank you very much, Yajur Arora, for having invited me to your program. Before I actually start answering your question, let me initially point out that although I have worked on the Mughals, my field of interest is Mughal history, but I have done more, work on Akbar rather than on Aurangzeb. Now, with this brief comment about my limitations, let us try to discuss a little how Aurangzeb as an emperor has been perceived. As you rightly pointed out in your introduction, that there are at least two points of view through which the reign of Aurangzeb has been seen or is being seen during the present period of time. Actually, Aurangzeb has been a favorite whipping boy for most of those who have tried to look back at his reign. Whether it is the historians or non-historians, it appears that there is a very divided opinion regarding the 50 years of Aurangzeb's period as a ruler. Traditionally, there have been two lenses through which Aurangzeb has been tried to be assessed and judged. Uh, One that has been the lens uh, of viewing Aurangzeb through the prism of religion. And then there is another view, as you pointed out during your introduction, a view which has emerged much later, more closer to our time, to look at Aurangzeb from a non-religious point of view. Now, as an answer to your question which you put up, I would divide my answer into two parts. The first part, I would be dealing with trying to look at how those who have used religion as a prism to observe Aurangzeb, how they have perceived him. And then after dealing with their view, we would come to the more recent view, which has been put forward. You named one of the scholars who is much more popular these days, Audrey Truschke. Sorry to say that she is not the first to come up with that view. So I would be discussing that in the second part of what I have to say about Aurangzeb. Now, if you look at how Aurangzeb has been seen with religion in the center as the prism through which the entire 50 years of his reign has been tried to be interpreted, there are actually two types of historians and two types of views which they represent. There are historians who have actually condemned him as being anti-Hindu. Today we are seeing the prominence of that particular type of view. Starting with a very well-known historian, Sir Jadunath Sarkar, one of the very prominent historians of the colonial period. He has written copiously on Aurangzeb. In fact, one of his books is around 6 volumes long, and then there is a shorter version of that, and there are a number of other books which he has done, and a series of articles which he has done on Aurangzeb. And then we have another very prominent person, very well read in the circles of the historians, S.R. Sharma. S.R. Sharma had written a book which is very popular amongst all students of history, Religious Policy under the Mughals. And then there are historians, for example, Ashirbadi Lal Srivastav, A.L. Srivastav, who wrote The Mughal Empire. And then R.P. Tripathi, Rise and Fall of the Mughal Empire. All these historians, I am naming just a few of them. Now, all of them find Aurangzeb to be guilty of being anti-Hindu. The thing which now is being brought to the bazaar level. But then on the other hand, there is another set of historians who also use religion to look at Aurangzeb's 50 years of reign. Some of them quite communal, others ordinary historians, but their perspective is different. They look towards Aurangzeb not with the eye of a Hindu or Hindu persecution being something bad. They look at Aurangzeb from a Muslim perspective. And from the Muslim perspective, they would also say that Aurangzeb was a Buddh Shikhan. If Sir Jadunath Sarkar and S.R. Sharma and others would criticize Aurangzeb for breaking the temples, this second group of historians would in fact, if not so openly, but they would be praising Aurangzeb for having done something for the cause of Islam. Because after all, basically most of the historians of this group come from beyond the border, the Pakistani historians. Although, let me say that there are a number of historians from within our own country who have also seen Aurangzeb from that particular perspective. I'll just name a few of them. There was one very prominent person, Allama Shibli Nomani. He was a theologian. He was at Aligarh, and he thought very highly of Aurangzeb. But he thought highly of Aurangzeb because he was in fact trying to reform Islam. Right. Then there is another historian. Most of the time he was in Pakistan. His initial beginnings were in India. Then ultimately he went to Pakistan. Ishtiyaq Hussain Qureshi. And there are a number of others. Let me not waste time in mentioning all of them. They are those who look at Aurangzeb from a Muslim perspective, but they also use religion as the prism of looking at Aurangzeb. To all these people, whether the so-called Indian or oblique Hindu lot or the Islamic one, both of them try to look at Aurangzeb essentially as a person who fought for the glory of Islam and for showing the Hindus their rightful place. Right. Now, for example, Ashirbati Lal Srivastav, who is one of the very famous Indian historians, he thought that Aurangzeb, in fact, represented the orthodox Muslim forces. Shibli Nomani, whom I have just named, he wrote that Aurangzeb was essentially from day one, he was fighting or representing for the faith, for the Islam, and he was not fighting for the throne, even from the time of the War of Succession. So Aurangzeb represented just puritanical Islam and nothing else. So if for certain historians, Aurangzeb was a Butt Shikan, an idol breaker in the positive sense, to certain others, Aurangzeb was an idol breaker in the negative sense. But to both these groups, he was an idol breaker. You know, this trait, this religiosity of Aurangzeb, of looking towards Islam, discrimination against the non-Muslims, was a trait which certain of these historians tried to show was within Aurangzeb even prior to his becoming the king, the emperor. He revealed his true colors even as a prince. Now there is a very famous historian, in no way he's communal, an American historian, John F. Richards, J.F. Richards, very famous among the students of history. He, in his book, The Mughals, he has pointed out that in spite of a large and economically viable empire, the last half of the period of Shahjahan was marked by a distinct ideological divide, which was, and I quote him, a long-standing political and intellectual conflict. And there was, according to him, a polarization of the empire of Shahjahan into two distinct groups. One led by the liberal Dara and the other by a conservative Aurangzeb. I mean, you must have seen that the present regime also tries to forward the view that Dara, in fact, was the liberal Muslim, the good Muslim, whereas Aurangzeb was the bad Muslim, I mean, a fundamentalist who has to be avoided. Incidentally, if you look at the course which is to be taught to the students, if you look at that, poor Akbar has been removed, but this illiberal Aurangzeb has been included in that course because it suits the present day regime to tell about the strife within the Indian community. Whatever, this idea was in fact given by a large number of historians, and I am just citing J.F. Richards, who in no way is a liberal historian. But he gives this. And he also pointed out, in fact, not only he, but all the historians whom I have just mentioned, that Aurangzeb represented the revivalist movement in Islam, which had in fact started during the reign of Akbar by Sheikh Ahmad Sirhindi, who was opposing Akbar, who was opposing the liberal policies of Sulekul, and according to certain historians was emerging victorious in his attempts. So Sheikh Ahmad Sirhindi's views were represented by Aurangzeb, whereas Dara, in fact, was representative of the views of the Sulekul, which was being put forward by Akbar. So, I mean, the entire empire, even before Aurangzeb came to power, was divided into these two distinct groups. One represented by a religious bigot, Aurangzeb, and the other a liberal Dara. And naturally, this gap widened after the ascendancy of Aurangzeb. This is what the general perspective, the view which has been put forward. And Aurangzeb tried to, what a number of historians tried to argue, clean Islam, liberate Islam from the heterodoxy and the influence of Hinduism. If Akbar had tainted Islam, and this is one of the views which some of the Pakistani historians also try to put forward, they say that Islam was harmed by the policy of Sulekul of Akbar. So if Akbar tainted Islam by incorporating the non-Muslims, the Rajputs, as well as the Irani Shias, Aurangzeb endeavored during his period to save the situation and show Hindus and Shias their actual position and return Islam to its pristine glory. That is somehow the view which started developing. Now, let me assure you that this is the preferred perception of Aurangzeb. This is not only the bazaar view of Aurangzeb. We might argue that this is what is happening today in BJP's India. No, this has been the perspective regarding Aurangzeb since a long period of time. And it is reflected in most of the textbooks which are prescribed for history throughout the country. And there is no denying the fact that this view has been magnified by the public perceptions of today. And why not? A simple reading of primary sources appears to support this narrative. One can cite evidence after evidence to show how Aurangzeb did play with fire. Can one deny the discriminatory policies of Aurangzeb? Perhaps one cannot. It was also pointed out that when he fought the war of succession, when he wanted to succeed his father, he started the war of succession on the basis of a slogan, religion in danger. So that is, the popular perception.
I think we should just emphasize that because I think that's something not very well known. That like when there was a schism appearing at the time of Shahjahan, there were people in India who felt that Islam was under threat, and Aurangzeb becomes their poster boy, their icon, who's there.
This is the view which has been put forward by a large number of historians.
And as you say, it's supported by his own writings.
Supposedly supported by a number of actions if you look at them superficially. I'm not saying that it was actually the case. What I am trying to say is that a superficial look at the sources would point out to the fact that there was some involvement of religion as far as Aurangzeb's development from a prince to a king was concerned. And that is what has been emphasized mostly by a large number of historians from the colonial past, from the colonial period, as well as represented in a large number of textbooks which were written. This view might not be necessarily the truth, and I will come to that later on. So I would not say that this was the perception during the period. What I am saying is that this is the perception which is being constructed by a number of historians based on a hurried reading of the sources, on a hurried interpretation of a number of actions which Aurangzeb took and the actions which have been reported in certain of the sources. Right? I think you can
So
understand the difference which I am trying to make.
yeah, absolutely. I think we'll talk more and more about Aurangzeb, but I just wanted to point out that the policies were so tolerant up till that time that there were actually groups of people in India who felt that it was Islam that needed to be defended, or it was under threat, or it was declining. I just wanted to point out that's a very interesting thing that in the Mughal period, prior to Aurangzeb, there was actually a portion of people who were anxious about the future of Islam.
In fact, as you correctly pointed out, there was one minuscule of a section, even among the Muslims, represented by people like Sheikh Ahmad Sirhindi, who believed that Islam was under threat because much liberal policy has been followed as far as the Rajputs and inclusion of the non-Muslims into the empire was concerned. Yes, to that extent, what you are trying to emphasize is quite correct. What I am trying to say is that it is perhaps one of the views amongst the many which prevailed during the period, not necessarily the predominant view which prevailed during the period. Right? Now, for example, modern historians, not the historians of Aurangzeb's period, there are certain modern historians who say, and I repeat, people like Sarjadunat Sarkar, people like Ishtiyaq Hussain Qureshi, they tried to point out, and these are all historians who were writing during the early part of the 20th century. They have nothing to do with Aurangzeb's period. And they say that actually Aurangzeb was fighting with the slogan, religion in danger. Right? That is how they tried to. And they also tried to point out that Aurangzeb was fighting against Dara, not because he wanted the throne, but because Dara was the prince of the heretics, Rais-e Mulahida. And that is why, the fight was being made between the certain sections of the nobility and the amongst the princes. Jadunath Sarkar, for example, I pointed out, wrote in his 6 volumes that in fact Aurangzeb wanted to establish Darul Islam, a true Islamic state. He wanted to convert the Hindu population to Islam. There were certain views which were put forward in this fashion. Ayat Qureshi, for example, Sarjadunath Sarkar, you can say, is a non-Muslim historian. Ayat Qureshi, he interpreted the reign of Aurangzeb as a rigid adherence to Shariat, to undo, as I said earlier, the harm which had been caused by Akbar to Islam. S.R. Sharma, I just pointed out, I am repeating myself, again a 20th century historian, trying to call the period of Aurangzeb as the period of triumph of Islam. These are all the interpretations which were being given during the 20th century. Now, on what measures were they based? On what basis did these historians try to put forward this particular point of view, which became so popular? Let me also point out certain of those measures which Aurangzeb had taken, which had been interpreted on communal lines. The first I would point out, a measure which he took soon after becoming the king. He abolished Tuladan, the practice of weighing the emperor against gold and silver and precious metals. And it was said that because it was a Hindu custom, so Aurangzeb did away with that. So it was pointed out by Jaduna Sarkar and others, look here, as soon as he became the emperor, he did away with something which was Hindu in origin. Similarly, it was pointed out, Jharoka Darshan, showing the face of the emperor in early morning, where he would be seen by the Brahmins who would then break fast. It was started first by Humayun and then carried on by Akbar, and now it is Aurangzeb. And why is he stopping Jharoka Darshan? Because it's a Hindu practice. That is how it was. Prohibition of sharab, wine. Of course, wine is something which is prohibited in Islam. So look here is a measure which Aurangzeb took, which points out that he is a Kattar Musalman. Doing away with the practice like Jahar Taslim, people had to bow before, and as a Muslim, you can bow only before God and no one else. So again, something which does concern yourself with Puritan Islam, and that was done away with. Astrology and making of almanacs. Astrologers were generally Hindus. This was a Hindu tradition. It was banned. And then discrimination in the taxation system. Different kind of taxes for the Hindus, which were different for the Muslims. For example, if a Hindu was bringing in some material, exporting something, the custom which he had to pay was 100%. The Muslim trader would be paying only 50%. It was a discriminatory one based on religion. That was one of the things. And then, a certain number of other measures, for example, banning of music. Music is, forbidden in Islam. So again, it was a measure which shows that Aurangzeb was a fanatic Muslim. Creation of Muslim zamindars in place of Hindu zamindars, giving lands, permanent grants to the Muslims, whereas from the early period it was only the Hindu zamindars who had been given permanent lands throughout the Mughal Empire. So here was Aurangzeb trying to counterbalance the influence of the Hindu zamindars by creation of a new group which was of Muslims. Then, of course, Abul Fazl Mamuri, one of the contemporary writers of Aurangzeb's period, he has written a book known as Tarikh-e-Aurangzeb. He says that Aurangzeb at one point of time stopped giving promotions to the Rajputs. No new promotion was given to the Rajputs, and whatever was saved, whatever land or amount was saved, was given to the Muslim in return for their service to the empire. So again, a discriminatory point. Imposition of jizya in 1679. It is an act which no one can deny happened. And then, of course, one of the things which we have been hearing in the past few months, the demolition of temples. The Persian sources do record that a number of temples, for example, the temple at Banaras, the temple at Malarna, the temples near Jaipur, Udaipur, Jodhpur, Somnath. They were, in fact, a number of temples near Uday Sagar. In fact, S.R. Sharma went on to give a list of hundreds of temples which were broken down. And naturally, all these measures were pointed out that now you cannot deny the fact that Aurangzeb was a person who was discriminating against Hinduism and was fighting for Islam. Now, if you take only these points of views, which I have just enumerated before you, it appears that Aurangzeb was a fanatic Muslim. I mean, this is the prominent view which has been. All evidences which I have so far cited before you, the examples which I have given before you, reported by very serious historians. Sir Jadunath Sarkar cannot be taken lightly. John F. Richards, as I say, is a very secular historian. At least to an extent, he is also of the view that Aurangzeb was discriminatory in his approach. So all these views go to point out, the historians point out, that actually it appears that Aurangzeb was nothing but a fanatic. A person using, religion because he believed in the discriminatory policy of Islam and was disfavoring the other community. And all these historians point out that there is no doubt that he was. However, there is another stream of thought which tries to differ from the above interpretations. And they try to show, this second or third, you can say, the view of a number of historians. You named one of them, Audrey Truschke. There are a number of historians who try to point out.
Just let me hold you for there. After everything you said so far, I think it's a very uphill task for somebody to counter that. I just wanted to make that observation.
Let me come to that. I mean, there are attempts. You see, one has to look at history from both the ends. Only then one can understand. And that is why I'm not shying from the fact that this is the general perspective through which Aurangzeb is being viewed. And there is no doubt that a large number of historians look at Aurangzeb only from this perspective. And that is why I laid that down before you. Now I am going to show how the other group is trying to develop to counter the viewpoints which I have so far presented before. As a historian, one has to take into account a number of factors. Why something happened? When did it happen? What was the perspective in which certain thing happened? In other words, what was the entire picture in which certain incidents, if you are pulling them down 1, 2, 3 in isolation and trying to look at them, what was the perspective in which these actions were being taken? Number one. Number two, do our sources actually support the way that things have been reported by these very respected historians? Whether the way they have interpreted, is it actually worth accepting that particular type of interpretation? Now, historians, for example, people like Professor Satish Chandra, one of the top class historians, who was also, the chairman of the UGC for some period of time. He has done much work on Aurangzeb and the later Mughals. You have another professor who is a Muslim, Professor M. Athar Ali. He was a very senior professor at Aligarh. Audrey Truschke, as you pointed out. All these historians and many more, they also, just like Jadunath Sarkar, whom I have just named, also base themselves on what they say primary source material of the people. Right. However, unlike Jadunath Sarkar, for example, these people had access to many more sources than were available to people like Jadunath Sarkar. Certain sources were not actually discovered during the period of Jadunath Sarkar, who was writing during the 19th century. And I would name just one source for an example. I mean, I don't have the entire afternoon to talk about that, so I'll just name one of the sources. Waqai Ajmer. I mean, that is Waqai Ajmer is the news report, daily happenings being written by the agent who was placed in the court of the Rathors, for example. I mean, each court had an agent of the Mughal Empire placed there, and there was an agent of the local zamindars and rulers and mansabdars and jagirdars and governors and so on and so forth, who were posted within the court. Right. So here is a man who is writing the Waqai at Ajmer. Right. Now, that source, for example, was discovered much after the death of Jadunath Sarkar. Now, when M. Atharali,
And can you share like an example of like how that challenge?
I will. Now, for example, Jadunath Sarkar had written that the Rathor rebellion, the rebellion of the Rathor Rajputs under Aurangzeb, had taken place basically because of the anti-Hindu and anti-Rajput policies of Aurangzeb. This was his interpretation, based on a number of his own sources on which he tried to say that actually the Rathors rebelled in 1679 at a time when the Rathor ruler Jaswant Singh died. The Rathors rebelled against Aurangzeb, and they were supported by a number of other Rajput clans. And this basically happened because Aurangzeb was following an anti-Hindu, anti-Rajput policy. Now, Ahmad Ali got access to Waqai Ajmer. Now, the agent noted down certain facts which brought out a totally different picture of the scene. I'll give you an example. In the Waqai, there is a letter written by the widow of Raja Jaswant Singh demanding that she or her ward should be accepted by the Mughal state as the rulers of the Rathor kingdom. And she argues that if you accept my demand, I am ready to break the temples in the Jodhpur region. The letter survives. Aurangzeb refuses. Now, Sir Jadunath Sarkar had pointed out that there was a cousin of the late Jaswant Singh who could have been given the tika, who could have been made the ruler of Jodhpur, as he was also a military commander under the Mughals. Jadunath Sarkar argued that Aurangzeb did not make this man as the ruler because he was anti-Rajput. He wanted to destabilize the situation at Jodhpur, and that is why this particular person, though the option was present, he was not made. Now, Waqai Ajmer points out that actually the man to whom Jadunath Sarkar wanted Aurangzeb to have had given the charge of Jodhpur was actually the man to whom Aurangzeb had given the charge. But as soon as the charge was given to this person, the Rathors rebelled. And why it happened? Because He was the son of the elder brother of late Jaswant Singh, whom Jaswant Singh had removed and captured power in the place of his elder brother. So the widow feared that if this boy was given the charge, she would take revenge of his father from the Rathors, and that is why the revolt occurred. Sarkar had talked about the revolt because of the anti-Hindu policies of Aurangzeb. And Bakai Ajmer very explicitly explains, and this account is from the court of the Rathors themselves. This is not a document which was prepared in the court of the Mughals. It says that the revolt occurred because a person who was opposed to the widow of Jaswant Singh had been given the charge by Aurangzeb, and it had nothing to do with the religious policy as such. So what I am trying to say is that when a reinterpretation to what people like Jadunath Sarkar was being made by historians like M. Athar Ali, there were new sources, both Persian and non-Persian, which were being discovered on the basis of which revisions were made. Remember that a historian says nothing. A historian would tell you something only if it is supported by his sources, right? And Satish Chandra, M. Athar Ali, Audrey Truschke, they all were now exposed to new type of sources which were given them information which had not been available earlier. For example, Satish Chandra had
before we go on, if you allow me, just one counter question. So in this example that you just shared, I would argue that the fact that this queen from Rathore proposes to destroy the temples and she thinks that that might please Aurangzeb, that still tells you that they're either, for whatever reason, his contemporary had an impression that a policy of temple destruction would appease, would be considered favorable to the ruler.
Exactly. I'm not denying that. And for that, I wanted to discuss that a little later, but now that because you have put up that question, so I'll try to answer.
I just can't.
I would answer you here. I would draw the attention, your as well as the attention of all those who are watching this, to two books. One written by D.N. Jha. Another, which is written by Richard Eaton. One, a professor from Delhi University, another, an American scholar. Right.
We've actually had the honor of hosting Professor Richard Eaton on our platform.
Right. Now, Richard Eaton, long time back, had written an article which was initially published in the Frontline magazine in two parts. And if you Google search them, and you will still find that article available on the internet. Right. Now, that article was later on published in a serious journal as well. Later on, he developed it into an entire book, which was printed, published in United States of America. Right. It is also now available on the internet. Now, if you look at that, he tries to argue that there was a well-established tradition, at least during the medieval period in India, from early medieval down to the medieval. And what was that? That when a ruling dynasty was defeated by another ruling dynasty, it was not only the household which suffered, it was not only the political power which suffered, but also there was a replacement of the Kul Devta and the temple of the Kul Devta with the temple and idol of the new Kul Devta.
Right? Yeah, it was a symbol of the previous ruler.
Each family had a private god. I am a believer of Shiva. you are a believer of Vishnu, and even in Vishnu, you are a believer of such and such God, and I am a believer of such and such God, and my dynasty sustains power from that particular God. So whenever there was a shift of dynasty, the temple and idol of the older, God was replaced by the image and temple of the new God. And Eaton gives an entire chart of how Vaishnavites were, replaced by the Shaivite and so on and so forth. Earlier than that, D.N. Jha, who was writing for the ancient period, he pointed out from Mitra Shunga onwards.
Pushpamitra Shunga, yeah.
Yeah, and he points out that even during the ancient period, that was an established.
He destroyed Buddhist monasteries, killed thousands of Buddhist monks, according to Buddhist texts.
Right. And so much so that Kalhan reports, according to D.N. Jha, and that is reported by Eaton as well. Kalhan, who has written the Raj Tarangani, and remember that Kalhan is supposed to be the first Indian historian. Kalhan reports that under the Hindu Rajas of Kashmir, there was a ministry which was the ministry of, temple breaking. Not because they loved breaking of the temples, because it was a practice where the image of the Kul Devta of the ruling dynasty, which was victorious, would now be developed, replacing the other one. Richard Eaton also points out that throughout the Mughal Empire, there was another practice, and that was to touch the religious places of those communities and people and areas which had come under rebellion. Zor Talab. Wherever there was a revolt, when they would be crushed, crushing that revolt did not even only mean that you kill them or you imprison them, but you also harm the power through which they were drawing their sustenance, their God, and replace their image with the image of your God, who is now successful. So these were the two practices, and that is why, when Rani Hadi was offering to break the temple, she was not actually asking that she become a Buddh Shikan. What she was asking was, she knew that if you want to replace the higher authority, spiritual authority, with your spiritual authority, I am ready to do that. That was the spirit.
You're absolutely right. But the topic of temple demolishing, destruction of temples, and within that, the deity replacement versus deity desecration. This is a whole big topic. I want to come to that later for sure. In Aurangzeb's case, this gets in. There's a lot of controversy around it. But I would, at this point, I just remembered you talked about Jaduna Sarkar. Jaduna Sarkar also talks about some very evidently desecrating activities conducted by Aurangzeb during his period as a governor of Gujarat, where, according to Sarkar, he killed a cow in a temple, and then after desecrating the temple, he converted it into a mosque. So there, it's not really because these temples are already within the Mughal domains. So it's not really replacing state power.
No, the thing is, Yajur, that the rebellion would occur only in the areas which were under your control. It is not a question of something happening outside your borders. Rebellions actually occur in the territory which is under your control. And what I would like to point out is that if you look at the date of each temple destruction and look at the political history which was being played out during that period of time, you will find that there is a close relationship between the political turmoil which takes place, and the result of which is that there is a breakage of the religious place of worship. That is something which has been, if you look at any type of region, any type of area, where this destruction, whether it was Gujarat, whether it was in the region of the Rajputana, whether it was in the region of Mathura, whether it was in the region of Banaras. Each of this area was under one type of revolt or the other against the sovereignty of the Mughals. And it was at that particular moment of time when orders were issued to destruct the temples of that particular area. And remember one thing, that not all the temples of that area would be destroyed. Only the temple which represented the political authority of the rebel, only they would be touched.
And the power dynamics in India of that time was such that in all these conflicts or whatever be the political situation, it was ultimately a temple being destroyed, not a mosque, despite all the concerns around Islam being under threat and saving Islam. The power was clearly shifted. Power dynamics was clearly in favor of Muslims and against Hindus, right? So regardless of the political machinations that would be at play.
I would in fact, Yajur, very respectfully differ from.
Okay.
In the sense that the political authority, at least under the Mughals, was being equally shared, not only by the so-called Mughal emperor, I would explain the term so-called, but no, it was not only the rule of the emperor which was taking place, the Mughal, but it was also the authority of the Rajput chieftains. Both were ruling together. You know, look at the history of the Mughals from Akbar's period. The first marriage of the Mughals with Rajputs takes place in 1561-62. The daughter of the Raja Bharaman, the ruler of Amer, is married to Akbar, right? Now, starting from there, you approach till the period of Aurangzeb, right? What you would find is that almost 50% of the nobility, the ruling elites of the Mughals, comprised not of Muslims but of Rajputs and Hindus. And they were ruling the empire as co-partners. They were the co-rulers along with the Mughal king. Of course, the sovereignty was with the Mughal emperor, there's no doubt. But they were also in authority. Who was Jahangir? Half Mughal, half Rajput. And what was Shahjahan? 2/3 Rajput and 1/4 Mughal. Who was Aurangzeb? He was 1/3 Shia, 1/4 Rajput, half Mughal. By the time that they were, these rulers from Jahangir onwards, even in their homes, they were not speaking and conversing with each other in Persian. They were conversing with each other in what is known as Hindavi. The women within the court, within the family, were being given permission, they were permitted to, profess their own religion. I challenge you to go to Fathpur Sikri, for example, the palace of Akbar. You would find the sculpture of Lord Ram and Hanuman still present on the palace of Akbar himself, where a palace which was, in direct use of the emperor. You look at what now is known as the Jodhbai Palace, which is actually a corrupt form. There was no Jodhbai who was a wife of Akbar, but it was the Haram Sara. And within the Haram Sara, you would find a place which actually has all the features of a temple. Right.
What we are questioning here,
Rajputs were being, suppressed is something which is a historical. Both the Mughal as well as the Rajputs, they were the ruling elite. Remember another thing, that as far as the kingship is concerned, kingship has no religion. Kingship has no relations. There is no kinship, no relation, no son, no brother, no mother, no father. No kinship. And secondly, kingship has no religion. For example, you take Aurangzeb. We are discussing Aurangzeb. I pointed out all those facts which point out that he was discriminating against the Rajputs. You look at his nobility. If under Akbar, the Diwan of the empire, the finance minister of the empire was Raja Todarmal, under Aurangzeb, it was a Khatri, Raja Raghunath. Yeah. Under Jahangir, there was no, Hindu Diwan. Under Shahjahan, there was no Hindu Diwan. Aurangzeb has a Diwan, the finance minister managing the resources of the empire, who is Raja Raghunath. Two very important states, Subas, which were generally given to the princes of the royal blood. Gujarat, which was the economic center of the empire. Deccan, the newly conquered area. I mean, when Aurangzeb was a prince, he was the Subadar of the Deccan. Don't forget that. And now who is holding the Deccan? Mirza Raja Jai Singh.
Yeah.
And who is holding Gujarat? Jaswant Singh, about whose family we were just now discussing. So, I mean, and who are the highest Mansabdars holding the rank of 8,000? The Rajputs. Who is the commander-in-chief of Aurangzeb's army? A Shia, Zulfikar Khan. I mean, the Shias, just like the Hindus, the Shias also point out that Aurangzeb was anti-Shia. Now, the commander-in-chief of Aurangzeb's army was Zulfikar Khan, one of the Shias. Look at the composition of the nobility under Aurangzeb. In fact, there is a letter which I want to quote before you. And this letter is written by none else but Prince Akbar, the son of Aurangzeb. Now, this son, Prince Akbar, was a favorite son of Aurangzeb. Right? And when in 1679, the Rajputs, especially the Rathors, revolted, Akbar sent Prince Akbar to go and suppress the Rathors and the other Rajputs. So Prince Akbar goes to the Rathors, joins hands with them. He revolts against his father. And along with the Rathors and other Rajputs, he drafts a letter and sends this letter to Aurangzeb, which is very important for us to know. You know what he writes in this letter? He says, Ke Baba, father, have you forgotten how you got the throne? You could never have had gained the throne but for the support of the Rajputs. Right? Now, here is Aurangzeb's own son, who is countering what Shibli Nomani, what Jadunath Sarkar had tried us to believe. That in fact, even during the war of succession, Aurangzeb was being supported by the Rajputs. Now I would remind you of one letter which Aurangzeb wrote at the time when he was, fighting the war of succession. He sent a nishan. Nishan is, a proclamation issued by a prince. He sent a letter to Rana Raj Singh. And what does he write there? He writes that when I become the king, I would be following the same policy as were being followed by my forefathers, the policy of Sulhpur.
Right? And he sends the letter to whom, sorry?
Rana Raj Singh.
Right.
Person
So
who belonged to the family of Rana Sangram Singh.
if I may just hold you there for a moment,
Hmm.
I think it is well known this is politically expedient. We see the politicians do this today. The government goes to one state, Manipur, and says one thing. They go to Gujarat. They say they just look at what the voters want. We see this in India. We see this in
Exactly.
Europe. We
Exactly.
so Jahangir, who we have letters and proclamations from Jahangir where he comes across as a Islamic bigot when he's sending those letters to people who are the Orthodox Muslims when he needs their power to become the emperor. Once he becomes the emperor, he exercises a very tolerant approach, just like his, because that suits him, just like his predecessors. But so with this letter that you're pointing out, it's obviously in context of to whom it's going. It's going to a Rajput. So Aurangzeb is assuring him that I will be as tolerant as my predecessors. But I want to actually bring in a view here, which kind of tends to explain this dichotomy between Sarkar's view and what you are pointing out. They argue that initially Aurangzeb, when he started, he needed the support of all these Rajputs, as you mentioned, with whose support he actually came to power. So he kind of continued with the policies and just diverged of his predecessors, of Shahjahan and Jahangir and all, and only slightly diverged. It as his own power grew and as some of these people started to die off, some of these close associates, that's when he becomes much more intolerant and he gets much more unrestrained in his policies of what is now seen as religious bigotry. So they argue that like it was in 1668 that he goes in and bans music in the 10th year of his reign. In the 11th year, he goes and tells people you cannot do namaste in court anymore. Then he goes out and imposes the jizya again, and this goes so on and so forth. The toll tax on Hindus. So these policies start coming, and I think in 1609, the Man Singh, Jai Singh
Hold
Daya,
on,
sorry.
hold on. I mean, what you are doing is you are supporting my point of view, and that is what
How
my
much?
argument is. And
Okay.
my argument is what I am trying to. I don't know whether I have succeeded in putting that forward or not. Is that Aurangzeb actually used religion to further his own interests? He was not a fundamentalist. You're quite right. When he wanted the support of the Rajputs, he wrote a letter to Ramadas that I will be very secular, right? I would do the same thing as Aurangzeb was doing. Very correct. And then there was a time, as you point out, no denying the fact that he issued orders. The temple of Varanasi should be destroyed. The temple at Mathura should be destroyed. There's no doubt about it. He ordered that jizya should be imposed. Right? No one is denying that. The only difference which people of today are not trying to make is that instead of calling Aurangzeb as a fundamentalist, they should label him that he was as good a ruler as the one ruling us today, using religion for his own forwardance of his own particular purpose. You see, remember, Yajur, that for the first 10 years of his reign, there's a peculiar period. There's a peculiar situation which is prevailing. And what is that? There are two emperors. How? Shahjahan is still alive and kicking. I mean, don't imagine that he's an old, suffering man just like Bahadur Shah Zafar. Not at all. He's
Yeah.
an energetic man in his full senses. He's not suffering from any illness. The only thing is that he is in prison,
Is in prison,
right?
yeah.
Who is Shah Jahan? Shah Jahan is one of the greatest of the Mughal kings, right? In what way? He is known by, the title which he took, Sahib Kiran-e Sani. What does it mean? The second Taimur. Sahib Karan was the title of Taimur. So he's invoking Taimur. I am the second Taimur. He's looking towards Central Asia. There are only two kings in India who actually went outside the borders of India. Ashoka, and then after Ashoka, the only person who crossed the Hindu Kush and went to the other side was Shahjahan, who was looking towards Balkh and Badakhshan. That is why he's asserting his, Turaniship, Turkish origin. I am the Taimur, right? And now when Aurangzeb, for the first 10 years, he is afraid that the Turani nobles, who are all Sunni Muslims, might once again go and support Shah Jahan. Where would that lead him? So he has no other alternative but to woo the Rajputs, number one, and number two, come out with certain policies which would satisfy the ego of the Hanafi Sunni Muslims. Tuladan, Chahar Taslim, this, that. I mean, this is the things which he is trying to do. You look here, I am a Muslim. Remember what Babur did when he was going to fight against Rana Sangram Singh? He went before the fight. He rode, an elephant, and before his soldiers, he broke the wine cup. I'm not going to drink. I am fighting a war against Rana Sangram Singh, right? And in Babarnama, it is written that 10 kuffars came to oppose him at Battle of Khanwa. And who were there among these kuffars, kafirs? Kafir means a non-Muslim. Who were these? The son of Ibrahim Lodi. He is one of the kafir chiefs whose name is written there. There are around 10,000 Muslims who are fighting against Babur at the Battle of Kanwa along with Rana Sangram Singh, and all of them are being referred as kuffar, just in the same way as Rani of Jhansi in 1857 is Mujahid, fighting jihad. Remember, these are the terms which are being used. Any person who is for the rightful king is a Mujahid.
I think
Any person who is against that is a person who is a kafir. This is how. So in the first 10 years, Aurangzeb literally is trying to woo the Rajputs by following a policy which they would appreciate, trying to follow a policy which would show his Hanafi Sunni nobles that he is inclined towards the Sunni faith. No need to go back to Shah Jahan, right? What happens, and when he comes to the throne, there is a farman which is issued, which is still there in Varanasi, where in a temple. And what does this farman with the seal of the emperor says? It says that no temple in my area should be disturbed. Every pandit who is, leading the puja should be maintained. They should not be disturbed. But then after 10 years, the same emperor orders the breakage of the temple. Why? Because that was the time when the Jat revolt occurred, when the Satnami revolt occurred. It was at the time when in Mathura, the Jat revolt occurred. And then later on, towards Varanasi also, that area was under rebellion. It was at that particular moment of time that the orders to break the temple. Another thing I would like to...
sorry, you there. But his political, doesn't look very political expedient. The people who are revolting, he's pissing them off further by doing all sorts of religious discrimination against them. If he wanted to end these rebellions, wouldn't it be a smarter approach to show a bit of tolerance and leniency, just as his grandfather and great-grandfather did? And also, I want to very quickly on this is my second question to you.
He offered the mansab to Shivaji. The status of 5,000 rank was offered to Shivaji. So one cannot say that he did not offer. He did offer. Both the carrot and the stick, both were used. Now, the rebellions which took place during that period, they had to be crushed. They were crushed. But remember, that almost all the number of Rajputs and Hindus who ultimately came to serve under Aurangzeb was a larger number than the Hindu nobles ever recruited under Akbar or under Jahangir or under Shahjahan. So one cannot say that. I mean, he tried to come up with both the type. On the one hand, he tried to crush. On the other side, he tried to give incentives to these people. And the only thing is that he kept on shifting his policy one from the other. And I personally believe that it was such a time that perhaps had Akbar also been there, he would have suffered the same fate which Aurangzeb was suffering.
So you think the dichotomy that we see in his policies was a balancing act? On one side, he's trying to manage this Sunni wing in his government, and on the other side, he's trying to manage the Rajput Hindus in his government.
Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. And also, there's one more thing which I would like to point out, Yajur, that when Aurangzeb comes to the throne, it was a period when there is a financial crisis going on. It was a period when the agrarian crisis was going on. I mean, and then ultimately, by the second half of his reign, even before he enters into the Deccan, there is, a paucity of the Jagirs which is resulting. So all type of, crises which are economic in nature. One of the historians of his period very sarcastically, said something which I am going to narrate before you. This person writes that, once a young child, an infant, was brought before Aurangzeb, and Aurangzeb gave him a mansab. He made him a mansabdar. So the people said, he is a child. So another remark, don't worry, by the time he grows a white beard, he would also get a jagir. So that was the crisis which was happening. That people were, even though official historians were making fun, that as an infant you would be appointed, but you would start getting your salary only at the fag end of your life.
Yes.
I mean, there were so many problems which were occurring.
But do you blame him for this economic crisis?
Pardon?
Do you blame the policies of Aurangzeb for these economic crises, his expansionist policies?
He, as soon as he came to the throne, he wanted to prove that he is much more vigorous than his father. Right? So he started the Deccan campaigns. He started moving towards Assam, Kuch Bihar, and unfortunately, in almost all the campaigns which he launched, there was a failure. Number one. Number two, all the places which were under his control, even in the north, people, places like Mathura, Varanasi, in the north, the heartland of the Mughal Empire. Jats, who were they? They were the peasants. They were not able to, the type of taxation which was there, which was a very regressive type of taxation, they were the people who were suffering. There was an abandonment of the land. They abandoned the land.
Yeah, it wasn't like that.
They abandoned the land, what would happen? There would be much more shortage of the revenues. When Aurangzeb entered into the Deccan, what happened? There was a fight over the fort. Now, as soon as his army would conquer one fort and move to the other place, there would be further rebellion. So what was happening, and that is what people like Satish Chandra have also discussed, that no new territory was actually being added. There were conquests which were taking place. Deccan was under him, but throughout under the turmoil, so much so that the revenues were not coming. On the other hand, to win over the people from the Deccan, he was offering them money. He was offering them, incentive of high mansabs. He would award them mansab. Ajao, you join me. You will get this much. From where to pay? And that's what happened and that is the thesis of Satish Chandra. What happened by the end of, Aurangzeb's reign? What happened is that Rajputs, Iranis, Turanis, all of them started getting divided on the basis of their groups. If there is a positive, what is happening in India today? I mean, Jats are fighting. This thing is fighting. You want reservation for your community. Why? Why this reservation is wanted? Because there is a paucity of jobs.
There's a
So that
shortage,
was
yeah.
the situation which was prevailing during his period, and he was trying to experiment. Sometimes he would punish, sometimes he would give incentives, but ultimately the plot was lost as far as Aurangzeb is concerned. I mean, everyone takes
So
Aurangzeb
I
as a
think
person who was selling Quran. He was in fact a very good Veena player.
I think this is a good point to bring up. The other major thing about Aurangzeb is the jizya, which is a matter of contention. Do you, like some historians, believe that it was because of this financial crisis, this extreme shortage
Uh,
of revenue, that compelled him to impose the jizya tax on non-Muslims?
no, I think there are certain actions of Aurangzeb which can never ever be defended in any fashion. One of them is jizya. There are certain historians who try to argue that actually the amount of jizya being collected was very less. It was no burden. Hmm. But then, was it not discriminatory? Even if it was a jizya which amounted to 1 paisa, it was a discriminatory tax. And that can never ever be justified. People try to argue that only minuscule number of people were paying jizya. I mean, you could have asked one question, or anybody asks a question, that during the reign of Aurangzeb, there are a large number of non-Muslim historians. Sujan Rai, Bhandari, Bhim Sen, Isar Das Nagar, so on and so forth. Many of them, none of them actually brings up this issue of jizya. Some of them just make a passing reference to jizya, but they never care. Why? The thing is that it was only the class of people whom today we call as Dalit, the downtrodden, who were actually supposed to pay the jizya. Brahman was not supposed to pay the jizya. The Rajput who was serving the Mughal army was not supposed to pay the jizya. The Kais and the scribes who were in fact recruited by the state, they were not supposed to pay the jizya. Why would they be concerned? For thousands of years, the Dalits have always been discriminated against. The Mughals never criticized the caste system at all. Hmm. Whatever. But what I'm trying to say is that it might be a tax which was being imposed on certain very, very low classes of the people. Number one, it might be a tax which was being imposed on minuscule number of peoples, right? But it was a tax which was discriminatory. It was discriminating people on the basis of religion and can never be justified. Similarly, there's another action of Aurangzeb which can never be justified. And that is his denial of the fact that the Rajputs or Hindus would not be given further promotions. That was on the basis of religion, and no sane person can ever justify that. Thirdly,
And
there
removal
was another
removal from
move
the
which said
revenue
no
office,
one can,
removal of Hindus from the revenue. And I
pardon, just
believe he
one.
yeah, please go
Uh,
on. Sorry.
no, there's only one more act which I will say that no one can justify, and that is the discriminatory, taxation on the merchants. If I am a Muslim merchant,
Trade
I am
tax.
paying 50%, the Hindu merchant is paying 100%. I mean, these are the three acts which can never be justified. Breaking of the temple was an established fact. But these three are something which no historian worth the salt can ever justify Aurangzeb. So there are features which are very dark, bad about Aurangzeb, and no one can deny.
So do you agree that there was some kind of his own religious views also at play in some of these policies? They were not all politically inclined. So I'll just bring out a view which is out there. When we put these things collectively, like what you've mentioned, the the trade tax on the Hindu merchants, the jizya tax on all non-Muslims, as well as preferential treatment in employment in the revenue collection service departments and all, not to mention, obviously, the temple destruction and the destruction of some pathshalas and all, but that we can put aside for now. But all of these were met. It's not important the economic pressure that they created on Hindus. What's more important is the humiliation, the symbolic humiliation that you have to pay, that you are being singled out for your religious faith. And it will go away if you convert, right? So there's also a claim that he would allow prisoners to be released if they would convert to Islam. So all of these were in collectivity designed to pressure a lot of people to convert to Islam. So that is one view, which sort of argues that he wanted.
Hold on. There is hardly any source of that period which tells us that there were conversions on a large scale. Aurangzeb or any of the Mughals was never interested to convert people to Islam. That never happened. So forget about the conversions. It never happened. As I said, that let us not talk about in the binary of Hindu versus Muslims. There were Rajputs. There were other classes of Hindus, so-called Hindus in the present sense of the term, who were not being discriminated against. They were the people who became the instruments to discriminate against certain others. Mirza Raja Jai Singh, he is discriminating and collecting the tax from the peasants, right? So he is part of that apparatus which is representing the Mughal state. So please let us not talk about in the terms of Hindus and Muslims. There were a large number of people who were aligned with the Mughal state, who in the present sense of the term we would call Hindu. But they were equally responsible for repressing the other section of the society, which also today we call as Hindu. So in fact, as far as 17th century is concerned, or 18th century is concerned, or 16th century is concerned, there was no uniform one class which was, or a religious group of people which was known as Hindus. It never was there. This is something which came into existence much, much, much later. So to talk about conversion number one, to talk about Hindu versus Muslims is something which is actually historically totally incorrect. Discrimination, yes, a class of people was being discriminated against, there is no doubt. Yes, there are certain actions of Aurangzeb which represents his Hanafi Sunni point of view, there is no doubt about it.
If you may just allow me, I agree with you 100%. This collective identity of thinking of us as Hindus and Muslims is this binary notion is very contemporary. It's very modern. It did not exist at the time. Clearly, the Rajputs did not see themselves as one with the Deccan, people living in the Deccan, the Tamilians or others.
They were the ones who were collecting the jizya on behalf of the state.
Absolutely. But I would, at least it seems to me when I read all these things, it seems to me that to the Sunni Muslims, there was a clear consciousness that we are one group and then the rest is everybody else. The rest could be the Shia, the rest could be Tamilians, the Parsis, the Christians.
That is true for all the ruling classes. Whatever the Rajputs thought themselves to be the ones appointed by God to rule. I mean, that was not true only for the Mughals, that they considered themselves to be having the authority to rule. We are talking about a different century altogether, which had different type of ideals. Those ideals cannot be reduced in the ideals of today. Let us not forget that. Number two, there is something which we have missed out, so I'll just point out very briefly. when you talk about the destruction of the temples, there is another fact which one has to also remember, that it was Aurangzeb who was in fact responsible for maintaining the largest number of temples. The number of temples being maintained by Aurangzeb was larger than the temples being maintained under Akbar or Jahangir. All those grants to the temples which were given once upon a time by Akbar were reconfirmed by Aurangzeb. All grants to the temples which were given by Jahangir were reconfirmed by Aurangzeb. All grants to the temples given during the period of Shahjahan were reconfirmed during the period of Aurangzeb. Plus, the confirmation of grants which were given by three different rulers. So all them collectively were being, maintained by the state. Number one. Number two, there are a number of temples which we know were also constructed, although there is an order, there is a farman which I did mention, that Aurangzeb was not going to allow the construction of a new temple. Maintenance
yeah, actually, I want to actually just narrate that farman, because it wasn't clearly. It wasn't clearly. I think it wasn't. Just can you repeat? Can you share with us the farman and then you talk about this? Because I think the Benares farman is a bit perplexing.
I will mention two farman. One which is dated 1658.
When he became the emperor.
Aurangzeb becomes the king. The war of succession was fought 1656 to 58. In 58, the formal coronation of Aurangzeb took place, right? And soon after the coronation, there was a farman which was issued, the royal decree which was issued. And what was that royal decree? According to this royal decree, all the old temples which existed within the empire of Aurangzeb were, number one, to be maintained. Number two, all those pandits who were performing their duties were confirmed. Three, they would not be disturbed in carrying out the prayers. And in case someone disturbs them, then the state is going to punish them. Just before this farman, there is a farman by Shahjahan, which says that the lighting of the diya in the mandir is similar to parastishe ilahi, the prayer to God, and they should be maintained. Aurangzeb is saying that this parastishe ilahi would be maintained throughout his empire. But the last point was that he would, however, not allow the construction of a new building.
Yes, that perplexes me. How do you explain that?
Now that I don't know. I mean, perhaps he did not want, but then if he was against idol worship, why was he giving the grants? So many grants. Perhaps just like his other moves, it was
the balancing
economic aspect. Because giving grant to construct a temple means a lot of grants. Just like banning of the music, which Aurangzeb is supposed to have done. That was also something which involved a lot of money. The purses of the princes and princesses, they were reduced by Aurangzeb in the same period when these restrictions were brought about. Remember that there was a financial crisis which was going on. My reading is that per se, Aurangzeb was not against idol worship because he was allowing them. I mean, there are grants after grants where he says that for the oil of the lamp, Chirag-e-Mandir, this grant is being given every day. For example, in one temple, he says that every day 150 liters of oil should be burned in this temple. So for that, a grant is given. So if you are carrying out with this, then what is the logic of not allowing a new temple? One thing is very clear. I mean, for example, like Mahmud of Ghazni, he is also known to be a Butchikan, the original sinner. You know,
Yeah, I can't.
and when he went from India, he took with him a large number of artisans and craftsmen and so on and so forth. And in Ghazni, where there was no Hindu, new neighborhoods were created for the lodging these people, and mandirs came up there. Jahan mandir nahi thi, wahan mandir aa gaye, and you are saying that he's a Butchikan. So
I wasn't aware.
Aurangzeb
That's fascinating.
maintaining mandir after mandir, and then you say that he's against, he's a Butchikan. Why he's not allowing new temples? He's not allowing a lot of new things to happen. Now, for example, I would tell you Vrindavan. Who doesn't know that Vrindavan temples were given grants by Akbar? Grants were given by Jahangir, Shahjahan. Aurangzeb continues all those grants which were given. Not only there, but there is a temple, Dauji ka Mandir, in Mahaban in Mathura. And there was an inscription, unfortunately removed in the last 1 year. It adorned one of the walls, and if you want, I can send you the photograph of that, epigraph. It says that in 1672, Aurangzeb granted money for the maintenance of the diya of this mandir. Right? The epigraph is there, removed only 1 year back. There is a temple, Someshwar Mahadev temple, near Sangam at Arail. An inscription which tells that the grant to maintain this temple was given by Aurangzeb. It was he who established it. B.N. Pandey, a very famous historian. I think every student of history must have heard about his name. He was also a politician. He was a Rajya Sabha member. Now, he points out a number of temples. For example, Mahakaleshwara Mandir of Ujjain. Grants given by Aurangzeb for its construction. Balaji Temple of Guwahati, Assam. Grants given by Aurangzeb. There are a number of other temples.
Yeah, the list goes on.
There is an article in Assam by a scholar, Anupama Ghosh, which has been presented in one of the sessions of the Indian History Congress. In Assam, Assam was one of the states which came under the rule of Aurangzeb only for a brief moment of time. Assam generally remained outside the Mughal Empire. It was only under Aurangzeb that Assam was conquered for a number of years, and then it ultimately became independent once again. But then there, during the period of Aurangzeb, there is a Kamakhya temple of Assam, where Aurangzeb in 1667 gave a grant for its maintenance. Similarly, Shaiva temple, another temple in a place known as Umananda in Assam, there is a grant by Aurangzeb. So what I am trying to tell you is very simple, that there are cases, instances which cannot be denied. The mosque or the temple at Banaras was
Kashi Vishwanath.
broken.
So the Somnath temple in Gujarat.
One thing. The historian who tells us that it was Aurangzeb who broke that Kashi Vishwanath temple at Banaras is a Muslim historian. Right? All the other Hindu historians, they are silent. None of them says anything.
May I know who's the historian who tells us that?
The historian who talks about the, let me. There is one historian whose name is Saqi Mustaid Khan. And it is Saqi Mustaid Khan uh, who tells us that the Kashi Vishwanath temple, in fact, was broken in 1669. No other historian mentions it. Sujan Rai Bhandari, he is also a historian, a Hindu historian, who is a critique of Aurangzeb. In fact, he is writing against Aurangzeb. No, he is no friend of Aurangzeb. But he doesn't mention. Uh, uh, Yajur, you can argue that because he was a non-Muslim, he was afraid to mention the breaking of a temple. बेचारा हिंदू था, कैसे मेंशन कर देता कि मेरी मंदिर तोड़ दी थी, डरता था वो. जैसे आज अगर कोई चीज हम मोदी जी के बारे में कहेंगे तो डरेंगे, अरे भाई कैसे कह दें. बट द सेम सुजान राय भंडारी mentions the breaking of the Mathura temple. The temple at Mathura, its breakage and then construction of the mosque, Jama Masjid of Aurangzeb at Mathura, which is also now in the news these days. Sujan Rai Bhandari mentions that, but fails to mention the breaking of the Kashi Vishwanath temple. Why? And although Sujan Rai Bhandari is one of those who keeps on visiting the region of Mathura, of Vishwanath, Varanasi, why is he not mentioning? Simply because during that period of time when this particular thing is being broken, he is not giving much importance to that. It is a region which is under revolt. The Muslim historian who's of Aurangzeb's period, he is mentioning that it is being Bhim Sen, Isar Das Nagar, Chandrabhan Brahman. These are all writers of Aurangzeb's period. None of them says a word against Aurangzeb, either on jizya or on the temple breakage, because jizya didn't affect them. They were the scribes in Mughal service. They were not the ones who were paying temples. That is established fact from the period of Pushyaputra Shunga. If you believe D.N. Jha, under the Sultanate and under the Mughals, it is also established tradition as proved by Richard Eaton. So there is nothing important to mention.
So this kind of a state violence and state destruction of symbolic temples of enemies or descendants is a common practice. So it doesn't get mentioned.
Practice which, in Indian subcontinent. A common practice which happened latest in 1992.
92. Oh yes, of course. So actually, I want to. Earlier, you had talked about briefly on how Aurangzeb himself says many times that he's fighting a battle for religion. It is a jihad he's going against, and a lot of people put too much weight on the primary sources. They're calling it a jihad, killing the kafirs. We actually have those writings from Akbar himself as well, and we know what Akbar's. I just want to. Akbar's actions are obviously not. Over his entire career don't actually tie well with what he said, that I'm doing a jihad against the non-believers and all. So it's actually interesting that people put too much weight in terms of what is said, but it's but we have to put it in a broader context, that why was it said. And I just want to point out something that I've learned from several of these conversations that I've hosted, is that it seems to be a tradition in India and world over that people tend to justify their wars in dharma. Before the Muslims, from the time of Ashoka, probably even before that, every violence against an enemy territory has always been justified in the name of religion, regardless of whatever might be the motivations to take over that territory. Akbar, interestingly, himself said many times that taking over Malwa and other places, he was trying to remove a bad government or a king to bring the just rule, which was clearly, obviously not the case. But it doesn't surprise me, given that in our age, we think of America as always doing the war in the name of human rights, or democracy, which seldom tends to be the case.
I think I would totally agree with you. Sometimes the people who are not well versed to understand the sources of the period and the language of the sources, they tend to pick out words and try to, look at their meanings from a 20th or 21st century perspective, which I think at least the historians should avoid. I would give you 2 or 3 examples. I just mentioned that in Babarnama, there is a mention that at the time when Babar is going to fight the Battle of Khanwa in 1527 against Rana Sangram Singh, there are 2 documents included in Babarnama which talk in terms of religion. There is first a farman, a royal decree issued before the battle, where Babar is supposed to be asking his supporters to fight for him, right? And then there is another document which is known as Fathnama, the victory document, which is issued by Babar in the name of Babar after the victory of Khanwa. Both these documents have religious invocations. For example, when he is going to fight, he says that a jihad is being launched and he is a mujahid. When the war is won and the Fathnama, the victory document, is being issued, he says that the 10 kafirs who came to oppose him have been defeated, killed, done away with. And it is the victory of Islam which has taken place.
Yes.
Right? And I told you that when he mentions the kafirs, who are they? They include even those who are non-Muslims, about whom there is no 2 opinions that they are Muslim or not a Muslim. They are being mentioned, but they are being labeled as kuffar. Number 1. Now come back to 1857. At a time when 1857 revolt is going. Do you think that the War of Independence, the first War of Independence, as Savarkar calls it, was a religious war? No. It was a war which was being fought to do away with the Angrez, the English colonial masters.
Colonial
Right?
oppression, yeah.
Yeah. Who's Tatia Tope? Is he a Muslim? Rani of Jhansi, is she a Muslim? Are they fighting a religious war? No, they are not. But both these Hindu participants who have declared Bahadur Shah Zafar as their ruler, the king, fighting under his banner, they call themselves as Mujahid. And when they are killed, they are Shaheed.
Very interesting.
Neither the war of 1857 was a war for Islam, nor technically any of them was a Mujahid or a Shaheed. Number 1. During the period of the Sultanate, you must have heard about Nizamuddin Aulia.
Of course.
That saint, Chishti saint, who was living under the Sultan, whose one of the disciples is Amir Khusro. Now, there is a record which tells us that the revenue officer goes to Nizamuddin Aulia and asks him, and I quote the Persian term, Jizya bedeh ya karamat be numa. Either pay jizya or show me the miracle. If you can show me the miracle, You don't have to pay jizya. Was this person who was sent by the Sultan to collect the tax was unaware that Nizamuddin Aulia is not a Muslim? No, he was aware. But still he is using the term jizya. Why? Because jizya in this context is not a term for anything else but a term for a tax, a levy, which is to be imposed on this particular people. Zia Barni, at a time when suppression of the intermediary classes, those Hoots, Muqaddams, Chaudharis, who were collecting taxes from the peasants, paying to the state, when their perquisites are being removed, what does Zia Barni write? Zia Barni writes that the women of these Hindus were enslaved by the Muslim nobles. And then there is this Eliot and Dawson translation where they pick up this term Hindu and use it in the sense of the 20th century and say, look here, a community, women of a particular community were enslaved. Hindu at that time was a term not used for a religious community. The term applied initially to the people inhabiting a particular territorial,
the residents of the hill, I guess that's would be the right definition.
So what I am trying to say is that sometimes the terms which are being used, they should be used in the same sense as they were used during the century. Nadir Shah invaded India, all of you know.
Yeah,
Massacre at Delhi took place. Massacre at Delhi took place. You know how he defined the Mughal emperor, whom he was, whose citizens he was massacring. He calls the Mughals Hinduan Kalmago. Right? Now, please, I mean, as a historian, my plea is that please try to understand the terms of that period, the context of the terms in which they are being used. Please don't distort the meaning by using them in a different context altogether. We are
I think
talking
for lay people like myself, we don't realize that how simple words of language evolve over time. What Hindu
yes.
meant in the Turkish age did not mean what meant something very different in the British age than what it means today. These
I will
terms
give
have
you a
evolved.
very minor example, a very crude example. Yajur, I think you must have also studied in some college or university. You know,
Thanks, that it looks obvious.
I know. Every one of us
Yes.
has. In every university, there is a dean who is on top of the heads of the departments. Now, go back to 16th century or 17th century. Who is a dean? Dean is not the person of the academic, university. Dean is a term derived from the church. He's a high priest, right? But now, if you use the term dean, you don't imagine him to be a priest. It's a
You
different term
talking about
altogether.
English, the
No,
evolution of English word. Yeah,
every
of course.
term has a context, and at one particular moment of time, it has a definite context in which that particular term is being used. There are a number of things. Today we are living in a democracy. Today we are living in a country where there is a constitution. Today we are living in a country where there is a parliament. Today we are living in a country where the parliament makes certain rules and regulations and we act accordingly, right? And if today we start invoking those traditions which were during the 17th century, I think we will be worse than Aurangzeb. What I tried to tell you today is Aurangzeb used religion. He did it very, very badly. He should not have done so. There were certain actions of Aurangzeb which no one can justify, no doubt. But remember that he was an absolute sovereign of 17th century. Today, we are not during the 17th century. We are now living in a democracy. And if today we start trying to follow the same vindictive policy which was once followed by the medieval rulers, then I think that we would be acting as savages. So my just message to all those who hear your program is that yes, there are certain actions of Aurangzeb which cannot be justified. Yes, Aurangzeb was a very wily politician. He knew how to use religion for his own purpose. He wanted to use religion to further his own interests. But he was doing so during the 17th century. Today, during the 21st century, if the rulers of today also do the same action and try to use religion to further their political power, I think there is nothing more bad than what they would be doing if they are doing so in today's times.
I think, Professor Rezavi, what happens is that whenever anyone comes with a counter view to the traditional view of Aurangzeb as a Islamic fanatic, usually what people think is that, oh, why are you trying to glorify Aurangzeb, or why are you trying to justify or defend him? I think what it's not clear to a lot of people is that calling that he arguing that he was not an Islamic fanatic doesn't mean he was a good person. Nobody's arguing. I've not seen any scholar argue that he was a good person, he was a moral person, he cared about human rights, or he was a good ruler. That's not being, I've never seen that argument being furnished. It's a fool's errand to do a moral assignment of a historical figure. They were who they were.
I have been talking to you for more than an hour. Have I tried to, project Aurangzeb as an ideal man? No, no question at all. He's as human as anybody else. He was a person who was using things for his own benefit. As a person who killed his brothers, a person who, in fact, imprisoned his father, how can people call him to be a good Muslim? Is it, was he even a good human being? No, he was not.
Yeah, exactly. And if we use the modern understanding of human rights and morality as we uphold it, nor was Akbar, nor was Ashoka, nor was any of them given the amount of violence each of them inflicted on innocent civilians.
The highest number of violent acts is Ashoka. Still Ashoka is great. We don't hold him responsible for what he did. He did whatever he did in that particular century. No one can justify that, but you are not supposed to be as critical of Ashoka because he killed so many Buddhists. He did it wrong, but then it was another century.
But history is not meant to give a moral marks on morality to historical figures. We just want to understand and study their actions and their motivations and the context around that. We're not here to give them marks that, okay, Akbar gets more marks than Aurangzeb. This is a fool's errand.
What I am trying to impress upon all of you, and that is what I do with my students, is I tell them that you pick up both these persons, Aurangzeb and Akbar, you replace one with the other, and you would find that you would start praising Aurangzeb and you would start criticizing Akbar, because this was the situation of the time, and as per the situation, being kings, they acted in certain fashion. It was not their inner self. Akbar was not a secular person. He was acting because he wanted to further his kingship. Aurangzeb was not a fundamentalist. He acted in that particular fashion because he wanted to become the greatest king of his own time. As simple as that.
And it just so happens for one of them, the political expediency was in using tolerance to further his goals. And for the
Exactly.
other, it was intolerance that allowed him to further his goals. So I just have bringing back to, you said he wasn't a good Muslim. Actually, I want to just my last question, my final question for this session to you, sir, is that many people say that the reason Aurangzeb looms large on our contemporary discourse in 2022 India is because Aurangzeb is being used as a poster boy for Muslims in general, and by calling him intolerant and fanatic, oppression and violence against Muslims in today's age is being justified by certain groups. So I want to question, why is that happening? Because it doesn't look like Muslims have ever wanted to use Aurangzeb as an icon. So why Aurangzeb said all of a sudden becomes the, is it just because he's so easy, because there's so much of content against him, so much of contemporary sources that the
You
Hindu
know,
right chooses Aurangzeb? Because the Muslim intellectuals have never embraced Aurangzeb. Like, just like I think you just said, he was not a good Muslim. That has been the prevalent view, that he was not a good son, he was not a good father, brother, he was not
but
a
he
good
was a
person,
good king.
he was
He
not a
was a
good
good.
Muslim.
He was a good king.
Thank you, sir.
He was presiding over the largest empire, so he was a good king. The thing is that I would say that mm, Aurangzeb acted as per his time. There's no doubt. Why is he being invoked today? Why is it that today an attempt is being made to bring Aurangzeb, highlight Aurangzeb? The attempt is being made by certain people who are actually aping the policies of Aurangzeb himself. Number one, using religion when everything has failed. Aurangzeb, for the first 10 years of his reign, never used religion. There was no need. Right? But then a time came when everything, whatever he did, started becoming a failure. There was a financial crisis going on. There was a crisis, agrarian crisis going on. There was, peasants fleeing from the territories. There were, all type of revolts which were occurring, and there were, a lot of problems. His son is himself revolting. There's hardly anything where he succeeds. He goes, tries to win new territories. He becomes a failure. When everything failed, it was then that Aurangzeb decided to pick up religion and use it for his own will. Right? Similarly, if you look at the present rulers of India, the successors of Aurangzeb in India, when their economy failed, when their politics failed, when every policy, whatever they took up from 2014 up till now, you start taking up year after year, you start, looking at the various policies. Every policy which was being taken up by this India government resulted into failure. And when everything failed, and you were on the verge that even in whose name you had come to power, they started criticizing you. There was a need to unite people on the basis of religion. And who else can help you better than Aurangzeb? By invoking Aurangzeb, the attempt is to unify the non-Muslim, masses, build up a hysteria that look here is a devil. You keep on pelting stones at him, everything would be fine. Aurangzeb, use of religion, the use of temple. Why this temple Abhishek after Abhishek? It has been how many years since this present regime has come into existence? Where is the Ram temple? The promise is there, carrot is there, but it is at a distance. It will happen, it will happen, it will happen. It's never happening. So the masses are being given an incentive of religion. Same way as Aurangzeb was dangling religion before his people to attract them and bring them to his side. He failed. Even the present attempts at using religion to conquer people, to conquer, garner votes, would once again fail. I mean, there was a time, people say that no, there is a consolidation of votes going on. It will happen for some time, but ultimately, remember what Hitler had to do. So ultimately, the result would be Aurangzeb failed. He died a desolate man. At the time of his death, there are accounts that he said that I could not hold anything. Whatever I did was a failure. What did Hitler do? He had no one along with him. What happened to Saddam Hussein? He died a desolate man. Every dictator, every person who tries to use the ideology for their own purpose ultimately meets with the same end. So I think today what is being done to consolidate the political power because everything else has failed. That is exactly what Aurangzeb did. He was a failure, and the present attempts would also not be successful.
So I had started this session with my bafflement expressed in my question that what makes a 17th century autocrat loom large over the 21st century political discourse of a modern democracy, the Republic of India. And you have answered that studying Aurangzeb, his politics, his reign, we can learn a lot about present day India, the 2022 India.
I mean,
Thank
Aurangzeb
you.
is a personality from whom we can have many lessons and many things what we as citizens of India, a diverse country, should never do. I mean, that is the best lesson which the reign 50 years of Aurangzeb tells us. And history is something which cannot be changed. We should use history to learn about the past and correct our future. And I think Aurangzeb can be used in that sense. Look at his, example and know what not to do. I hope that the present rulers or whoever gains political authority in India would learn from Aurangzeb what they should not be doing. And one big no-no which one learns from 50 years of Aurangzeb's reign is, please don't use religion to further your interests.
Very well said. It's the future that can be corrected, not the past.
Yes.
That's
That happened, what good or bad, that happened.
It's done. Well, this was one of the most enlightening sessions I've had. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you. We went way over our time, but I was like, this is so interesting. I cannot cut it short. Thank you, Professor Rezavi. This was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for
And
calling me.
we
Thank
hope
you for
to,
calling me.
we hope
Thank
to
you.
have you again with us in future. Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks you, every one of you. Thank you very much.